In April 1986, 9-year-old Anthonette Cayedito disappeared from her family's home in Gallup, New Mexico, and has not been seen since. She grew up with her mother, Penny, and her younger sisters in a modest home in Gallup, a city that sits along historic Route 66. By all accounts, Anthonette was a responsible, bright, and caring child. She looked after her younger siblings and was known to be mature for her age, taking on significant responsibility within the household. Sadly, Anthonette had to grow up too soon, and by 6 years old, she was largely responsible for taking care of the necessities of life for her younger sisters. The events of the night Anthonette vanished are central to understanding the mystery of her case. On April 5th, 1986, Penny, who was raising her daughters mostly on her own, had gone out with some friends in the evening hours. She returned around midnight, sent the babysitter home, and went to bed. The details vary depending on the source, but what is known is that the family was inside their home at 2 a.m., presumably safe and sound. At around 3 a.m., there was a knock at the door. According to statements later given by her younger sister, Anthonette got up to see who was there. What happened next would become the focal point of the mystery. The younger sister advised that Anthonette opened the door to someone who allegedly identified themselves as Uncle Joe. Another account suggests that a friend of Penny attended the house around 3:30 and knocked on the window of the Cayedito residence. This friend, named Ron Perry, was subsequently interviewed by the police. Perry denied any involvement in the disappearance of Anthonette despite this unusual event. Penny, who claimed she was asleep in another room, said she didn't hear either a knock on a window or a knock on the door, and only became aware of Anthonette's absence later. Another version of the events would be given by one of Anthonette's sisters 5 years after the incident. She claimed that after the incident with Uncle Joe, another knock came. Anthonette answered it again, and this time she was abducted. Sadly, the true account of what happened on that fateful night remains a mystery almost 40 years later. When morning came and Penny attempted to get her ready for Bible school, she discovered her daughter was missing, and panic and confusion allegedly set in. And yes, you heard what I said correctly. It allegedly set in. Keep this in mind. She immediately contacted the local police, and the search began. But something weird happened almost immediately. The police didn't actually conduct a full search of the Cayedito residence for 4 days. This delay has never been satisfactorily explained. With few leads and no immediate suspects, the case grew cold. Family members were questioned, and Penny was asked repeatedly about what happened that night. She eventually stated that a weird man named Emo had given Anthonette flowers multiple times a day leading up to her disappearance. Notably, she didn't tell the police about Emo until her family members questioned her repeatedly if she had reported these incidents. This lead, however, didn't go anywhere at the time. And I say at the time because we're going to come back to this lead in a bit. Over time, authorities also turned their attention to the possibility that someone known to the family had orchestrated the abduction. However, no direct evidence emerged. About a year after the disappearance, an unexpected development breathed new life into the investigation. In 1987, the Gallup Police Department received a phone call from someone who sounded like a young girl claiming to be Anthonette. On the recording of that call, the child pleaded for help, identified herself by name, and said she was in Albuquerque. Before the dispatcher could get more information, an angry adult voice was heard in the background shouting, "Who said you could use the phone?" This was followed by the sound of a scuffle and the call abruptly ending. The authorities tried to trace the call, but the lead went nowhere definitive. Still, Penny, upon hearing the tape, believed it was her daughter's voice. This call gave investigators a crucial, if confusing, clue. It suggested that Anthonette might still be alive a full year after her initial disappearance. Unfortunately, No further progress was made in connecting the call to a tangible suspect or location. Another potential break in the case came from a reported sighting in Carson City, Nevada, a few years later. A waitress encountered a teenage girl who seemed distressed and in the company of an unkind couple. According to the waitress's account, when the couple and the girl left, she found a note scrawled on a napkin that read something along the lines of, "Help me, call police." Some have speculated that this girl could have been Anthonette, older now and potentially trafficked or held captive by her abductors. Police investigated this lead as well, but like the phone call, it never conclusively led to Anthonette's rescue or the identification of her captors. Without solid evidence, this sighting remains one of the many unconfirmed tips that have come and gone over the years. Anthonette's family life was not without its challenges, and over time some have questioned whether her mother, Penny, knew more than she revealed. In 1994, these suspicions seemed to be confirmed when Penny asked investigators if she would be in trouble if her and Emo had been involved in some way. According to the FBI, Penny confessed to the crime, even going so far as to tell Anthonette to open the door on the night of her abduction. For reasons that are entirely unclear to me, despite the confession, Penny was never charged in relation to Anthonette's disappearance. Penny subsequently died of liver cirrhosis related to her drinking problem in 1999. Emo, the man who she claimed was involved in the abduction, was also never charged, though it appears that the FBI has been unable to locate him. I've attached an age-progressed picture of Anthonette. If you have any information regarding her disappearance, please contact the Gallup Police Department, who still has an open file on her case. The disappearance of 3-year-old Jaryd Atadero in 1999 is as tragic as it is disturbing. On October 2, 1999, Jaryd Atadero was staying with his father, Alan, and 6-year-old sister, Jocelyn, at the Poudre River Resort in Colorado, which Alan co-owned. A Christian singles group that Alan was affiliated with was also at the resort and planned a small walk to a nearby fish hatchery. Alan allowed Jaryd and Jocelyn to join them, believing they would only visit the hatchery and that the adults would properly supervise the children. However, the group decided to hike the Big South Trail in the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest, a decision made without Alan's knowledge. During the hike, the group split into faster and slower walkers. Jaryd, full of energy, ran ahead and encountered 2 fishermen, asking them if there were bears in the area. They assured him there weren't, and he continued up the trail. The fisherman had noticed the group of hikers that he was with, and had assumed these Christian singles were actually watching this little one on the trail. Tragically, as we are about to find out, they weren't, and this was the last confirmed sighting of Jaryd. Shortly after, some of the Christian singles group members heard a scream, which they couldn't definitively identify as playful or distressed. Realizing Jaryd was missing, they searched for about an hour before returning to inform Alan that his son was missing. The search for Jaryd was extensive but faced numerous challenges. The search efforts that followed were swift, massive, and complicated. Local and state authorities, search and rescue teams, and even the National Guard were involved in the initial phases of the search. The operation included mounted patrols, foot searchers, helicopters, scent tracking dogs, and even specialized equipment that could scan the wilderness for infrared signatures. Despite these comprehensive efforts, the team turned up nothing. Weeks turned into months without any sign of the boy. No articles of clothing, no footprints, no fresh leads emerged. The Atadero family's hopes were sustained by their unwavering faith and the dedication of volunteers, but the Colorado winter eventually made searching exceedingly difficult. Speculation about Jaryd's disappearance ran rampant. Some experts suggested that a mountain lion attack might have been to blame, The wilderness where Jaryd vanished was known to be home to such predators, and though attacks on humans are rare, they're not unheard of. The idea, however, was contested by others, who pointed out that no evidence of a predatory attack had been found. Another line of reasoning considered that Jaryd may have simply wandered off the trail and fallen into one of the steep chasms or rivers below. The trail bordered a large, swift, cold river. If he'd slipped, he could have been swept downstream. Yet thorough searches along the riverbanks failed to turn up any conclusive evidence. The case took an unusual turn in 2003, nearly 4 years after Jaryd disappeared. In June of that year, 2 hikers ventured off the established trail while searching for a fishing hole in the same region where Jaryd had vanished. High above the trail, nearly 500 feet up a steep incline, the hikers stumbled across something that made them stop in shock: children's clothing and partial human remains. The clothing, including a small shoe and parts of a shirt, seemed to match what Jaryd had been wearing when he was last seen. Nearby, a fragment of a child's skull and a single tooth were discovered. Authorities later confirmed through DNA testing that the remains and clothing belonged to Jaryd. The location of the remains was perplexing. How had a 3-year-old child managed to climb to such a remote and inaccessible area? The Big South Trail is already challenging for many adult hikers, let alone a toddler. The steep cliffs and densely wooded slopes seem nearly impossible for someone so young to navigate. Additionally, the clothing bore strange conditions. Some sources report that the clothing appeared intact and even seemed remarkably clean and bright, despite being exposed to harsh mountain elements for years. This condition raised questions. Had the remains and clothing been moved there recently, or had they somehow remained hidden for all that time? Local authorities and the Larimer County Sheriff's Department examined these discoveries carefully. However, the official position on the cause of Jaryd's death remained inconclusive. While predation by a mountain lion was considered a possibility, there was never any direct evidence like hair, claw marks, or large blood traces to confirm that scenario. Another possibility was that Jaryd had simply climbed higher up the mountain, became lost, succumbed to exposure, and his remains were later scattered by animals. Unfortunately, the sparse evidence left after 4 years made it impossible to say for certain what happened. One lingering mystery is why the initial search and rescue efforts failed to detect any of these clues. Some have speculated that searchers simply never looked high enough above the trail, assuming that a young boy wouldn't climb so far off the beaten path. That said, there were helicopters involved in the search, which would have mitigated this factor substantially. Others have considered the possibility that weather conditions and the natural shifting of vegetation over time might have hidden the remains. Dense vegetation, seasonal changes, and the accumulation or movement of forest litter could have obscured signs of Jaryd's presence. Another lingering question is regarding the members of the Christian singles group who were out on the hike that day, and I'm going to interject a bunch of my own thoughts in here. Authorities treated their involvement as cooperative and really don't seem to have investigated them any further beyond that. Before I say what I say next, I should mention that there's no indication of any foul play by the Christian singles group members. However, their decision to deviate from the planned fish hatchery trek and take the children on the Big South Trail raises significant concerns. Taking 2 small kids to a dangerous hiking trail and not watching them closely is unbelievably irresponsible. Young children don't understand risks like wild animals or getting lost, and they rely completely on adults to keep them safe. Letting a 3-year-old run ahead in such a risky place shows a shocking lack of care and common sense. This kind of neglect turned what should have been a routine outing into heartbreaking tragedy that could have been avoided with just a little more caution. Also, taking the children to a risky hiking trail without their dad's permission isn't just irresponsible, it's a massive betrayal of trust. Alan entrusted the others with his kids, assuming they would prioritize their safety and stick to agreed plans, which included a very safe short hike. Ignoring this by taking kids to a hazardous area puts them in unnecessary danger and shows a lack of basic accountability. Sadly, these actions led to an innocent kid losing his life and an entire family being shattered.